Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
Foolish Jonah was like someone made for the fun of wild boys. He was about 18 years old, but he looked like a 13-year-old child. When he came back from the store where his mother often sent him on errands, the boys ran after him and teased him. "Jonah! Foolish Jonah!" they shouted. He walked slowly, as if he saw and heard nothing, using all his strength to stay calm and breathe heavily. Sometimes he was so scared that he shook, and his thin legs could barely hold up his weak body. When they blocked his way and threatened him, he turned his blank, white moon face, which looked like it was made of wax, and looked at them with scared eyes. For a moment he stood silent and still, as if death were reaching for him, and then tried to escape any way he could. "Jonah! Jonah!" they called after him in their teasing voices as soon as they saw him start to shake. He never tried to fight back. As soon as he got home, he handed over his purchases and then sat down in a corner by the oven. "Come here, dear little brother. Take your stool and sit by me," his sister called softly. She was only a year older than him. She was a pretty, thin, yellow-haired girl, and she put her sewing aside at once. He slowly dragged the stool to her feet. She took his poor, confused head to her chest. He cried as if his heart would break. She petted and hugged him, holding back her own tears with difficulty. "I'm not foolish, am I?" he finally managed to say. His weak voice shook. "Of course you're not. You're smart, little brother. Let them talk. And you like me, don't you? And I am not foolish." And on his face, something like a smile appeared. "Now get your violin and play something." "I don't want to hear any more of that noise of his now. He can play at night all he wants to, up on the roof," grumbled his mother. Jonah sat where he was and kept looking up at his sister. He watched her every move. Jonah's mother and brothers did not love him. He only had his sister, and he loved her very much with all his weak mind. But in the neighborhood, people said he was inspired by the Holy Ghost. No one taught him to play the violin. No one could copy him. He never had a teacher, and he only played his own songs. His songs were strange, sad, and foolish, just like him. Jonah lived in the same house where I lived when I was a child. He knew me. Whenever he saw me, he nodded his head and smiled. I can truthfully say, even though I was a child too, I never hurt or bothered him. There was something about his wax-like face that was special to me. My childish mind saw in it a resemblance to the dead, wax faces I had seen under glass behind the altars in the churches. It was Saturday evening. The late summer twilight covered everything in a magical veil. The sky was blue and dark at the same time, and here and there were silver stars like the thoughts of saints. In between, the big, yellow moon swam in all its glory, shining light on small huts and tall, grand churches. The busy activity that is common in homes on Saturday night had slowly quieted down. The women, who had been so busy earlier and had been talking loudly on the wooden balconies, the stairs, and in the courtyard, had gone to bed. Only on one balcony of the third floor, a girl and a young man were talking. They were engaged, and the next day they were going to get married. Pretty Mitzel, Jonah's sister, was the bride, and a hard-working young man from the factory was the groom. He had just been offered a better job in the country, and because of this, the wedding was rushed. They had been sitting there for some time. While people were still up and about inside, they talked in whispers, as if they were afraid of the outside world. But now that it was quiet everywhere, their conversation could be heard, as if they wanted the calm and beautiful night to hear their happiness, their promises, their plans. There was one person in their neighborhood who was showing his feelings just as clearly as they were, but it did not bother them. But the feelings he showed were not as happy, confident, and carefree. Foolish Jonah was playing his strange, fantastic music on the roof. People said that this music could not have come from his own confused and dim head. When his white fingers moved on the vibrating strings, sometimes loudly, sometimes softly, when his bow made mighty and majestic tones, the listening people said it was the Holy Ghost speaking. The conversation of the lovers went on without interrupting the sad violin song from the roof. They were too interested in each other, and too used to his music, to pay attention to it. Jonah himself did not see them because he was playing on the roof above their heads. The house where we were living was old-fashioned. It had a saddle roof which, towards the street and courtyard, had two parts sticking out. In nice weather, Jonah took his violin and hid himself in the space between the roofs. He was sitting hidden there when the young man came to see his sister, and he was playing madly as if he would never get tired. In fact, his music was like works of art. Tonight, he suddenly stopped in the middle of a piece, just as if the strings had refused to work. The hand that held the violin dropped limply down, but his tired face, which was turned toward the moon, looked like it was made of stone. After a little time, he got up slowly. Carefully, he placed the violin and the bow upon the roof, and then walked softly as if he were afraid of hearing his own feet. He walked to the edge of the roof. Here he leaned against a pipe and looked down upon the pair of lovers. A cloud moved across the moon. They were talking about him now in quiet voices. "I think your brother is unusually sad today. Is he getting worse, do you think?" asked the young man. Jonah nodded his head. "He is always sad, poor fellow, and especially so in the past few days," replied Mitzel. "He keeps asking me if I am really going away from him. You'll let me take him with me, won't you?" "Not at first. Later, maybe you can have him." Mitzel hugged him. Jonah slowly moved back from the edge of the roof and walked carefully away to his place. Here he sat down again, rested his head on his hand, and looked up at the moon. Tears rolled down his cheeks, but no sound of crying was heard. His lips opened slowly, and he said in despair, "I knew it. She doesn't love me as much as she loves him." He sat there a long time, and tears rolled down his face. As if sadness were choking him, he took the neckcloth from his neck and dried his eyes with it. At last, he got up quickly and disappeared. He left the violin and bowed upon the roof. Jonah had spent many nights upon the roof, so they did not look for him until the next day when Mitzel was putting on her wedding dress. Then they found him. He had hanged himself with his neckcloth. It was some months later when Mitzel celebrated her wedding.